Naomi Bell reached the bakery before sunrise with her mother's recipe book against her ribs and rainwater sliding down the windshield like the city itself was trying to blur what had happened. She had already survived a bleeding courier beside her ovens, Marcus's gun against her side, Sora Kang's smile at the ferry office, and Han Seo-jun's dangerous silence in the back of her van. But none of it had prepared her for the video that appeared on her cracked phone at the red light near Yesler. Marcus stared into the camera with one swollen eye, stripped of charm, whispering that Sora had sold the archive twice and that another buyer was coming for the bakery server because Evelyn Bell's hidden files had synced the moment Naomi opened the drive. Before Naomi could answer, a hand dragged him backward, the screen went black, and the ordinary morning traffic behind her began honking as if her world had not just split open again. She did not call Seo-jun first, and that choice mattered because fear had finally become practical instead of obedient. She called Mrs. Alvarez and ordered every employee away from the bakery, then called Seo-jun only after she knew no innocent person would walk into the fire meant for her mother's secrets. When he told her not to go back, his voice carried the cold authority of a man used to being obeyed. But Naomi was already turning toward Bell's midnight bakery with both hands hard on the wheel. "If they burn my mother's bakery to erase your war," she told him, "I will never forgive either of us." She ended the call before he could mistake concern for command, parked behind the laundromat, and entered through the back with the spare key Marcus had never known existed. Inside, two men were tearing apart the office, while one poured accelerant along the storage shelves with the bored precision of someone destroying a life he did not have to understand. Naomi killed the breakers, dropping the kitchen into darkness, then moved through the bakery the way only she could, knowing the loose rack wheel, the floor dip near the dish pit, the oven door that fell too fast, and the 50-pound flour sack waiting beside the prep table. She knocked one man into the wet floor and took the gunman's knees out before his second shot could come, and when Seo-jun entered through the rear door with 3 men, and violence held under perfect control, the look he gave her was not relief alone. It was fury forced to admit that she had saved minutes no convoy could buy. The captured intruder laughed with blood on his mouth and warned them that copies had already been paid for by Victor Lenkov, a broker moving stolen intelligence through fishing warehouses along the Duwamish. Naomi understood the shape of the trap before Seo-jun finished questioning him. Lenkov had the copied archive, Sora had sold him the promise of access, but he still needed the local salt file hidden inside the bakery server and the password pattern only Evelyn's daughter could read. Seo-jun wanted her out of it, but Naomi had spent a lifetime watching powerful people treat ordinary women as furniture until they needed something hidden in plain sight. She copied the salt file onto a clean bakery USB, shaped like a tiny rolling pin, handed the real server drive to the attorney racing toward them, and kept the decoy, because men like Lenkov always trusted stolen objects more than the women carrying them. The warehouse smelled of diesel, salt and fish ground into concrete, and Marcus sat tied near a steel table, shaking so badly that Naomi almost saw the boy she had once protected instead of the man who had aimed a gun in their mother's kitchen. Victor Lenkov stood behind him with calm disappointment, while Sora Kang waited nearby with one bandaged hand and a face emptied of its earlier elegance, no longer queenly, but still poisonous. Naomi entered first, because that was the bargain. Seo-jun's men hidden beyond the yard, legal recordings running through the attorney's emergency contact with investigators who had finally been forced to move because evidence had become too public to bury. Lenkov demanded the file. Sora mocked Seo-jun for following a woman into another trap, and Seo-jun answered quietly, "Only the honest ones." Naomi plugged the rolling pin USB into Lenkov's laptop and entered the password pattern from memory. Not the true sequence, but the altered one she had built from her mother's margin note. Brown sugar first, salt after. Trust the one who asks, not the one who takes. The screen filled with files, and Lenkov smiled before he realized every folder was copying outward to the attorney, prosecutors in Seoul, and the federal organized crime unit surrounding the warehouse with warrants built from the night's recordings. Sora understood first and lunged for the laptop, but Naomi slammed it shut on her injured hand, hard enough to make the woman's composure finally break. Gunfire tore through the warehouse, brief and ugly rather than glorious, and Seo-jun pulled Naomi behind a steel column as a round cut across his ribs. Marcus, still tied to the chair, threw himself sideways into Lenkov's knees, a coward's survival instinct becoming useful at the only moment it could still matter. Agents and Seo-jun's men entered from opposite doors, not friends and not allies, but forced into the same room by proof neither side could quietly destroy. Lenkov fell under 3 bodies. Sora tried to escape through the loading bay, and Mrs. Alvarez's nephew, an off-duty paramedic Naomi had called before the dock, blocked the exit with a tire iron and more courage than sense. When the shouting settled into cuffs, blood and rain blowing through the open bay, Marcus lay on the concrete crying that he had tried, and Naomi stood over him with flour still dried in the creases of her hands. "You tried when consequences finally found you," she said, and when he whispered that he was sorry, she answered, "I know, you still have to pay." Weeks later, Bell's Midnight Bakery reopened before sunrise with reinforced locks, a cleaned office, and a server backed up through people Naomi trusted by name. The first tray out of the oven was honey rolls, because grief deserved sweetness when it had earned none, and her mother's recipe book rested behind glass near the register, open to ordinary measurements instead of secrets. Seo-jun came in after the morning rush with bruises healing beneath his dark coat and ordered tea he did not want because he had learned not to arrive empty-handed or armed with gifts too large to refuse. Naomi told him the archive had cleared his brother's name, and he said it had also convicted men he once called family. When she asked if that made him weaker, he looked around the warm bakery and answered, "No, it makes what remains worth trusting." Naomi was not ready to love him, and he was not foolish enough to ask, but when she pushed the honey roll closer, and he accepted it without touching her hand, both of them understood that something had survived the fire without asking either of them to become smaller. By the 3rd week after reopening, Naomi had learned that peace did not arrive like a gift. It had to be tested by ordinary mornings until the body finally stopped expecting the next door to open, with blood behind it. She still woke before her alarm, still checked the alley camera before unlocking the back entrance, still paused whenever a black car slowed near the curb, but the bakery had begun to breathe again around her. Mrs. Alvarez complained about the new security system beeping too loudly. Truckers argued over cinnamon rolls. Church ladies pretended they were only buying biscuits for other people. And Naomi kept her mother's recipe book behind glass because some things deserved to be seen without being touched. Seo-jun came twice a week at first, then less often when Naomi told him that safety could become another kind of pressure if he stood too close to it. And to his credit, he listened. The first sign that something remained unfinished came through a woman in a grey raincoat who arrived 10 minutes before closing and ordered 1 honey roll without looking at the menu. She had the tired politeness of a government employee, the kind of face that could disappear inside elevators and courthouse hallways. But Naomi noticed her hands before anything else, because they trembled only when she reached for cash. On the bill she slid across the counter, someone had written a string of numbers in blue ink, and beneath them was 1 sentence in Korean, folded so sharply that it looked accidental until Naomi opened it near the espresso machine. She could not read the words, but she recognized the name Min Jae inside them, because some names had become part of the bakery's weather. The woman left before Naomi could ask a question, and the security camera showed her stepping into no car, speaking to no one, vanishing into rain as if she had been sent only to place a match near dry paper. Naomi did not call Seo-jun immediately because she had promised herself that every strange thing in her life would not automatically become his jurisdiction. She photographed the note, sent it first to the attorney, then placed the original inside a flower invoice envelope where no visitor would think to look. Only after the attorney replied with 2 words, "Call him," did Naomi press Seo-jun's number and listen to the silence before his voice arrived. When she read the sentence phonetically from the photo, his breathing changed in a way she had come to understand better than any confession. "It says my brother did not die carrying the ledger," he told her. It says he died carrying a child. Naomi looked through the kitchen window at the empty alley, and the warmth from the ovens suddenly felt too thin for the room. The child, Seo-jun explained when he arrived after midnight without the theatrical storm of guards Naomi had once expected from him, had been a rumor buried beneath family shame and strategic convenience. Min Jae-han had loved a woman from a rival faction, and the official story had turned that love into carelessness because powerful families preferred dead men to remain useful. If the note was true, then Min Jae had been moving more than evidence the night he was killed. He had been trying to move his pregnant lover out of the city before Sora's people and Seo-jun's own father could decide whether bloodline, scandal, or inheritance mattered more than a young woman's life. Seo-jun stood in Naomi's kitchen with his coat still wet and his face held so still it looked almost cruel, but Naomi could see the old wound being reopened from a different angle. "You think the child lived?" she said, and he answered that he did not know, which frightened her more than certainty would have. The numbers on the bill led not to a bank account or a shipping route, but to a sealed storage unit rented under Evelyn Bell's name 4 months before her cancer diagnosis. That discovery sat between Naomi and Seo-jun like a third presence, because her mother had not merely protected evidence, she had hidden a door and died without handing Naomi the key. They went before dawn, not with a convoy, but with Naomi's attorney, a locksmith, and one of Seo-jun's quiet men, waiting outside the facility office where fluorescent lights made every face look guilty. Inside the unit were no weapons, no cash, no cinematic crate full of secrets, only 3 plastic bins, an old baby blanket wrapped in butcher paper, and a stack of handwritten letters tied with kitchen twine. Naomi knew her mother's handwriting before she read a word, and anger rose in her so fast she had to sit on an overturned box because grief was easier when the dead stayed innocent. The letters were addressed to a girl named Clara, though the oldest envelope used a Korean name Naomi could not pronounce correctly until Seo-jun said it once, and then stopped speaking. Evelyn had hidden the child with a nurse in Tacoma, paid through bakery cash and church donations disguised as funeral fundraisers, and cut herself out of the arrangement when Sora's watchers came too close. Naomi read enough to understand the shape of her mother's sacrifice. Evelyn had protected Min Jae's daughter, not because she trusted the Han family, but because she did not trust any family that could turn a baby into a claim. The final letter, written in the thin, uneven hand of a woman already losing strength, told Naomi only one thing directly. "If anyone comes looking after I am gone, make them prove they want the girl alive more than they want the truth." Naomi handed that page to Seo-jun, and for a long moment he held it without reading, because he already understood the accusation. They found Clara in Portland, under another name, not through Mafia reach but through the attorney's careful legal channels and a non-profit adoption archive that treated privacy like a sacred thing instead of an obstacle. She was 22, a nursing student with Min Jae's eyes and a cautious smile that disappeared the moment Seo-jun's name entered the conversation. Naomi met her first because Evelyn's letter had insisted on that order, and because Naomi knew what it meant to be approached by a powerful family after a lifetime of being told you should be grateful for attention. Clara listened from across a diner booth with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup, saying little while Naomi explained only what could be proven, leaving out bloodier details until the girl asked for them. "Do you work for him?" Clara asked, and Naomi answered, "No. That is why I came before he did." When Seo-jun finally stepped inside the diner, he did not bring guards within sight, did not wear the black coat that made men in Seattle move aside, and did not try to make grief look noble. He stood at the edge of the booth, as a man meeting the living consequence of a brother he had mourned incorrectly for half his life, and Naomi watched Clara study him with the brutal intelligence of someone deciding whether resemblance could be trusted. Seo-jun bowed his head, not deeply enough to perform shame, but enough to remove any claim of authority from the room. "I cannot ask you to be family," he said carefully. "I can only tell you that your father was not what they made him." Clara looked at Naomi before answering him, which told Naomi exactly why Evelyn had arranged the order this way. The girl did not need a kingdom. She needed a witness who had refused to be owned by one. That night, Back in Seattle, Naomi placed Evelyn's final letter beside the recipe book and understood that her mother's secrets had not ended with evidence, trials, or cleared names. They had been a long, stubborn argument against every world that treated vulnerable people as bargaining chips, and Naomi felt both proud and furious to have inherited that argument without being asked. Seo-jun stood near the register, far enough away to respect the silence, close enough that she did not feel alone inside it. "You could have taken her," Naomi said. "Years ago, your family would have—" Seo-jun looked at the honey rolls cooling behind the glass, then at Evelyn's handwriting under Naomi's palm. "Then your mother was right to hide her," he said. Naomi did not forgive the world that made such hiding necessary, but when she locked the letter inside the case, she knew the next choice would be hers, not Evelyn's, not Seo-jun's, and not any dead man's war. The next choice arrived 3 days later, not as a threat, but as an invitation Clara did not know was dangerous, until Naomi read the address printed beneath the polite legal language. The meeting had been requested by a family court mediator in Portland, supposedly to discuss access to sealed adoption records and determine whether Clara wanted any contact with the Han estate. But the building listed on the notice had been closed for renovations for 6 months. Naomi checked through the attorney first, then through the non-profit archive, and by the time Seo-jun arrived at the bakery after midnight, she already had the notice spread beside the recipe book, with a yellow highlighter cutting through every lie. "Someone wants Clara to walk into a room where the law looks real from the hallway," Naomi said, keeping her voice calm because anger was more useful when it did not spill. And whoever sent this knew enough about her paperwork to make it feel official. Seo-jun read the notice once, then placed it down with the carefulness of a man resisting the urge to crush paper, because paper was not the enemy. His first instinct was written across his face before he hid it. Take Clara somewhere controlled, surround her with loyal men, turn her life into a guarded corridor until every possible threat had been removed. Naomi saw it, and let him see that she saw it. "Do not make the mistake your family made before she was born," she said. "If you turn protection into ownership, you will lose her before anyone else gets the chance." Seo-jun looked toward the glass case, where Evelyn's letter rested beneath the bakery lights, and the old lesson stood between them, more sternly than any living judge. "Then we let her decide," he said, the words costing him enough that Naomi believed them. Clara chose to come to Seattle, not because she trusted Seo-jun, and not because she had suddenly accepted a dead father's world as part of her own, but because she trusted Naomi's refusal to soften danger into something prettier than it was. They met in the closed bakery after the evening rush, with Mrs. Alvarez in the back pretending to inventory sugar because she had announced that no child of Evelyn Bell's protection would sit alone with gangsters in her lifetime. Clara listened while the attorney explained the forged notice, then asked the question no one else wanted to place in the center of the table. "Is this about money, blood, or revenge?" Naomi looked at Seo-jun, giving him the chance to answer without using power as a shield. "All three," he said. "But if you ask what they need from you, the answer is blood." The truth came from Sora's sealed evidence more than from anyone's confession. Min-jae's daughter had a legal claim to a dormant trust created by Seo-jun's grandfather, a trust tied not only to money, but to voting control over legitimate shipping assets that Sora's remaining allies needed in order to rebuild what the archive had destroyed. If Clara signed recognition papers under the wrong counsel, or if she was frightened into disappearing without challenging forged documents, the assets could be redirected through men who had already survived one purge by pretending loyalty. Naomi watched Clara absorb the information without tears, which made it worse somehow, because shock did not always look dramatic when it entered a person who had spent years expecting life to reveal hidden costs. "So I'm useful," Clara said. Seo-jun's jaw tightened, but Naomi answered first. "You are a person they made useful, because they do not know how to see people any other way." They decided not to hide Clara, because hiding would prove the enemy had chosen the battlefield. Instead, they let the forged meeting happen under conditions Clara controlled, with the real attorney filing a quiet notice to the court, federal investigators observing from a neighboring office, and Seo-jun's people kept far enough back that no one could claim intimidation. The old renovated building in Portland smelled of wet carpet and cheap paint, and the fake mediator waiting upstairs had the smooth impatience of a man who believed young women became manageable when surrounded by paperwork. Clara sat across from him, with Naomi on one side and the attorney on the other, while Seo-jun remained outside in a parked car, because the hardest proof of his growth was his absence from a room he wanted to dominate. The man slid documents forward, explaining inheritance, identity verification, temporary authorization, and safety arrangements in language designed to exhaust rather than inform. Clara let him speak for 9 full minutes before she opened the folder Naomi had helped her prepare. Inside were copies of Evelyn's letters, the adoption archive timeline, the forged notice, and one photograph of Min Jae taken from the recovered files, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that a dead man's name did not belong only to men fighting over control. "Before I sign anything," Clara said, her voice steady enough that Naomi felt pride rise through her chest, "I want you to explain why this document lists a court clerk who retired in 2019, a case number from a different county, and a trust officer who appears in Sora Kang's payment records." The fake mediator's face changed slowly, the way a locked door changes when the person behind it realizes someone has the key. He reached for his phone, and the federal investigator stepped in before his hand closed around it. What none of them expected was the woman waiting downstairs by the service exit, older, Korean, her hair silver beneath a black scarf, her posture too elegant for the damp concrete hallway. Seo-jun saw her first from the car and moved before his men did, not with anger, but with disbelief, so sharp Naomi felt it before she understood it. Clara came down behind the attorney, stopped beside Naomi, and watched the woman look at her as if 22 years of silence had finally become flesh. "Her name is Ji-yeon," Seo-jun said, voice roughened by something deeper than strategy. "She was Min Jae's lover." Clara did not step forward. The woman did not ask her to. Instead, Ji-yeon bowed her head and spoke through tears she seemed determined not to use as currency. "I was told you died before I woke from the hospital," she said. "I believed it because cowards brought me ashes and called them mercy." The final betrayal had not been Sora's alone, but an older cruelty committed by families on both sides who believed peace could be purchased by separating a mother from her child and burying the lie beneath enough official grief. Evelyn had learned the baby lived because the nurse came to the bakery in terror, and she had hidden Clara not from one faction, but from everyone, including the woman who might have run straight into death trying to reclaim her. Naomi watched Clara face a mother she had never known, an uncle she had not asked for, and a history that wanted to swallow her whole, and she understood that protection always left scars when truth arrived late. Clara finally asked Ji-yeon why she had come now, and Ji-yeon answered that Evelyn's last archive release had included a hospital bracelet, a date, and a name no one had managed to erase. Months later, Bell's Midnight Bakery became the one place where the surviving pieces of that broken history could sit without pretending they fit neatly. Clara did not move into Seo-jun's world. Ji-yeon did not demand motherhood as repayment for suffering, and Seo-jun did not ask either woman to heal faster so his guilt would become easier to carry. Naomi made honey rolls on the morning Clara signed her own trust documents under real legal counsel, keeping control of the assets without handing her life to any family name. And when Seo-jun arrived after closing, he found Naomi washing flour from her hands beside the sink where the first blood had fallen. "Your mother protected everyone," he said. Naomi looked at Evelyn's recipe book, then at the dangerous man who had finally learned that love without restraint was only another form of taking. "No," she said quietly, letting the bakery's warmth hold the truth without softening it. She protected the choice everyone else kept stealing.